If you've ever read any of Dion Mayer's books, you'll know the name Benny Grissel. He's the murder detective at the center of many of Dion's crime thrillers. And in real life, there are not many police officers who become household names. But Cape Town's top cop hero for decades has been Lieutenant Colonel Mike Barkhuizen. He is the real deal. He's hunted down the killers of famous author Richard Reeve, former First Lady Marika de Klerk. He put musician Tully Peterson's wife Najwa behind bars for his murder. He reunited Zephany Nurse, as I said, with her biological family after 18 years. And his cases have always been in the headlines. I've covered so many of them. But Mike has pretty much preferred to stay in the shadows until now, because after 43 years in the police service, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Barkhuizen has retired from the Hawks, and he joins me in the studio for his first exclusive interview on his remarkable career and on his wedding anniversary. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Melanie. Good afternoon to your listeners out there.
We've known each other, when I went back over the case, we've known each other for 20 years. 1998, that was the urban terror campaign in Cape Town, the bombings across Cape Town.
Yes, and also all the long hours spent at the High Court.
Yes, many long hours waiting and postponements. For you, which is the case that stands out the most? I mean, it's it's like asking who's your favorite child, but I mean, which is the case that really you look back and you say that was an incredible achievement?
Actually, I would say the Marika de Klerk case, but for a few different reasons. What had happened is that we had been employed elsewhere. We were investigating the bombings in Cape Town, if you recall, between 1996 and 2000. And Mrs. de Klerk was murdered in January. So our work had sort of winded down, and I had a team of very bright and dedicated detectives. So when that case came in, I was able to start the investigation with gusto, if I can call it that. And it was, if I may call it, a very professional investigation. From the onset, we realized, this was going to be very high profile. The Americans referred to it as major case. This is major case all the way. And we knew there would be a lot of scrutiny later in courts. So we had to watch our P's and Q's and do everything 100% according to the book.
Now, she was found in her Dolphin Beach apartment with a steak knife in her back.
Yeah, she'd had an appointment with the hairdresser, and she didn't pitch up. And then the hairdresser raised the alarm, and they went with some of the people from the premises there, the caretaker. They climbed up on the balcony and got into the flat and found her lying dead in the passage in the flat. At that stage, no foul play was suspected. And then we were called in, and then we obviously had the pathologist there, and when we turned her over, we saw the steak knife protruding from her back.
A lot of pressure behind the scenes for you on that case.
Yes, but as I said, they are a very competent team, very, very dedicated people, and as the leads came in, we were able to follow them up sort of immediately, and we worked basically 24 hours a day on that case.
And it was the security guard who did it?
Yes, at the end of the day, what gave him away is that he'd put his SIM card into Mrs. de Klerk's cellular telephone, which was one of the items that he'd stolen. And he'd made a telephone call, and this led us to him at the end of the day.
For you, I mean, you joined the police when you were 17 years old. What led you to choose this career path?
Actually, I always wanted to become an aircraft mechanic. That was my dream. But when I got, I think, to about standard 8, in those days it was still the junior certificate, I couldn't keep up with the maths. So I realized I was never going to become an aircraft mechanic. And a friend of mine was going out with a policeman's daughter, and we would visit them at home and so on, and it just appealed to me, the discipline, the orderly, everything that was orderly. And then I decided, well, this was the career for me. And at the end, I actually left. In those days, you could still write your matric in the police college. So I left school at the end of standard 9 and did what they referred to in the old days, the law matric, a rechtsmatric, and then took it from there.
you went on to do some unbelievable cases as a detective. Talib Peterson, let's chat a little bit about that.
I must correct that. I was actually not on the Talib Peterson case. That factually is not correct. I was
Yet
not involved.
It's everywhere as Talib Peterson.
Yes, I know some of the press articles have associated me with many cases. For instance, the Dina Rodriguez case. I was never involved in the Dina Rodriguez case.
But you were involved in Shreen Dewani. You brought him back from London.
Yes.
Shreen Dewani, who was accused of murdering his wife on their honeymoon here in Cape Town. So after all the attempts to get him back, finally he is brought back for trial. That must have been a very interesting plane trip.
Yes, it was very, very interesting in the sense that I was actually just the investigation supervisor. The actual investigating officer was somebody else. Yes, we travelled initially we travelled alone to London, and we investigated, did our investigation there. And all in all, we travelled to London on 4 different occasions, sometimes with and sometimes not with the prosecutors. And then the 5th trip was the final, when we actually went to go fetch him. And that was after the extradition had been granted.
Did you talk to him?
No, not actually. We'd been informed beforehand that his attorneys did not want us basically questioning him without them being present. And they were obviously not on us with the flight. And we had a nurse who was appointed to look after him. So we were basically just there to keep an eye on him, proverbially speaking.
Okay. When you also did the Zephany Nurse case, which I know a lot of listeners have a huge interest in, tracking down her father. The sister was at the same school as her. The father then invited her out for coffee. The birth dates showed up, and then you took it from there in terms of the DNA. Very
interesting cases in that sometimes, especially with the more high-profile cases, these are sort of once-off cases. It's not something that you investigate every day. And you work with different sets of law. So you actually have to go and acclimatize yourself. You have to go study the law and see what the law says, that you don't make, which could later be fatal mistakes. And in that specific case, because the child was underaged, we couldn't just go and pluck her out of school and so on. And ultimately, we needed her DNA. And fortunately, we were able to get social workers on board. And they assisted us with the case. But we were also very fortunate.
So how did you get her DNA then?
We had an operation where we arrested the suspect, and then we went with social workers to the school where she was at that point in time, and we informed her that we suspected that she was a child that had been stolen 17 years ago.
What was her reaction?
She was actually very calm about the whole story, but she was very cooperative. And we then arranged. We'd done everything beforehand. We'd got legal advice from the Director of Public Prosecutions and from social services, and we arranged that overnight that she be taken to a place of safety. But in fact, she was actually in the company at the house of one of the social workers. She looked after her for the night. And that gave us time to get her blood sample taken and rushed through to a private clinic in Tygerberg. And the next morning at 9 o'clock, we got a call saying this is the child. Obviously, they compared the DNA, the blood sample, to the DNA of the mother and father, which we'd already taken beforehand.
And were you the one who broke that to her?
Yes, it was very dramatic. We brought the child to our offices where the mother and the father were waiting for her, and a teary affair. Everybody was crying. The social workers, obviously, it was something. I must admit, I also got a bit of a
tear in the eye.
A tear in the eye. Yes, I actually walked out of the room because it was such a nice thing to see. And especially for the mother, the biological mother of the child. I mean, she must have gone through hell for 17 years. But she's a very religious woman. And I remember, look, I had to do with the family since 2010 when I started looking for this child. And every time I saw the money, she would tell me, I'm praying for you. You're going to find my child. I'm confident you will find the child. And I'm sure her praise also helped at the end of the day for us to find the child and recover her.
When you get given a case like that, you've said to me that the part of what you love about being a detective is that there's a beginning and an end, but sometimes there isn't an end. What's the one case that you're going to leave the police service with that will haunt you?
Well, there are actually a few. I can remember in 1991, if I remember correctly, this young girl's name has just slipped my mind now. She'd lied to her parents out in Brackenfell and said she was going to sleep over with a friend, and she walked home late at night, and she was attacked and raped and murdered. And this case also sort of stuck in the back of my mind. You know, it's like when you go fishing, the one that got away, proverbially speaking. But there are quite a few cases that at the end of the day I would have loved to have cracked. I wasn't the initial investigating officer in the Inga Lotz case, and we respect the court's finding that her boyfriend, or he was acquitted in the case. But to look farther afield, if there was somebody else who had possibly committed the crime, I'd like to have cracked that, solved that case. It's a terrible injustice for a poor child like that.
Because you also you are with the victim's family a lot.
Yes, and it's difficult not to get involved, on a sort of a personal level. But you obviously must be sympathetic to them, and sometimes it does affect you to a certain extent. For your family, when you get a case, are you gone for days? That's it? You're on the hunt for the killer? Yes, especially when my children were much smaller. I was at the Peninsula Murder and Robbery Unit, and there if we picked up a murder case, we'd basically just go home. Sometimes to go have a quick shower and put on fresh clothes. So it was long hours and long, but that's what solves cases. You've got to put in the hours. At the end of the day, if you don't put in the hours, you're not going to solve cases.
I remember talking to your daughter at your farewell, and she was talking about how she came along with you because you just wanted to check something out, and 5 hours later you were still chasing a suspect with her in tow. And you ended up surrounding the man.
She'd asked for a lift somewhere in the morning, and we just never got round to her chore that she wanted to do because something came in. I got a call over the radio, and that obviously took precedence, so she had to proverbially sit on the back seat. I still hear about that story from her.
For you, what was one of the most interesting cases?
I had quite a few, actually. I remember in the early in 2000, also in 2001, just after the Klerk murder, I assisted the New Zealand police with a murder investigation there. I followed the news, and I think this guy's actually coming out on parole very soon, a guy named Colin Bower, who murdered his wife. He systematically poisoned her with diabetic medicine, and she died later. And
what was the motive?
Well, it later came out he was having an affair. He had another girlfriend. I think he just wanted to get rid of, the proverbial old story. He wanted to get rid of the wife because he had a girlfriend. Yeah. Well, yes, one sees it quite often in the news and so on. But he was convicted in New Zealand, and what gave us a bit of a breakthrough is that we established that he'd actually tried to poison his wife while he was still working as a psychiatrist at Tygerberg Hospital. And all the records had been microfilmed, and I basically walked into dead ends wherever I went. And then I went back to Tygerberg. I was persistent, pugnacious, and I fought with them until we found these microfilmed records, and those apparently were very important when they were presented at the court case at the end of the day in New Zealand.
Let me just remind listeners that if you have any questions for Mike, you can give us a call 021-446-0567 or send an SMS or WhatsApp to 072-567-1567 or 31567. And Ashley writes, enjoy your retirement, Mike, and thank you for your service. I want to know, do you have a special method or procedure when you get to a crime scene? Do you have a gut feel? Where do you usually start?
I was fortunate that I had very experienced and learned peers. And I'd like to single one out. He's also retired, General Nick Acker. And these are the guys that I learned, especially murder cases, and also one of my some of my other colleagues. You've got to look at everything and look at it again and again and again, and come back tomorrow and have a look at it again, that type of thing. And then obviously take photographs of everything and make sketches. You can refresh your memory at a later stage.
Do you have a gut feel?
Every crime, yes. And I think that gut feel gets better and better the more experienced you get. I think a rookie detective won't have much of such a gut feel, but the more experienced you are, you realize when you get to a scene, you can actually work out sort of a picture in your mind what actually happened there, which is more difficult when you're not experienced.
James in Athlone has a question about the Annie Dewani case. James, welcome to the show.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
What's your question for Mike?
Hello, Mike. Why was that guy that murdered his... In fact, which I read the news headlines, the news, that he organized his wife to get murdered here in Khayelitsha. He got off. They went out of South Africa to go and fetch him in London, and then he was left off the hook. What happened there?
James, thanks for the call. In that case, Shreen Dewani was acquitted, which you say you respect the decision of the court. The court's decision in that case said that the prosecutor just hadn't presented a strong enough case for conviction.
In recent times, I think we've had more than one case. There's a saying, damned if you do and damned if you don't. And I think you get some cases where there's evidence. You don't proverbially have the smoking gun, but you have evidence that indicates that this is the person that committed the crime. And I think that was one of the cases that fell into that category. We must remember that the case hinged on the testimony of the taxi driver, Zola, who pleaded guilty and went to prison. And everything, we investigated this very thoroughly. Everything that he said was corroborated, either by video evidence or other facts or witnesses. And based on this, the prosecuting authorities decided to apply for his extradition. You must remember, just after the crime, although he was a person of interest or a suspect, you can't just go around arresting people, especially foreign subjects. So we had no choice but to allow him to go back to England. And by the time we had enough evidence to formally name him as a suspect in the case and started specifically targeting him in the investigation, he was back in London.
How did that feel for you personally?
Well, it's just one of the challenges. None of these cases are easy, some of them. But I think an important thing that a lot of, maybe the press and a lot of things of the public did not see in the case, and this is my personal opinion, I'm not talking on behalf of the police, is that the circumstances of the case actually made it easy for the defense to attack our star witness, which was the taxi driver. Because you must remember, when he originally handed himself over, we took a statement from him in which he set out what had happened. He then pleaded guilty. His attorney drew up a statement which was handed in at court as part of his plea. Then at a later stage, he testified in another trial against another accused, the accused that subsequently died of a brain tumor in hospital. And then finally came the trial of Shreen Dewani. Now, in all these statements that he'd made, there were fine, or very small differences. He couldn't say the same thing 100% in all the statements. And I think the defense capitalized on that. Another thing which I think was a bit unfair is especially the British press, they said, no, but this is unbelievable that a guy would land in Cape Town and go speak to the first guy that he saw about murdering his wife. But if you look at the Dina Rodriguez case, something similar happened there. She didn't know anybody at that taxi rank. She took a wild chance and went to the taxi rank and started making inquiries. So it's not impossible that things like that happen in Cape Town, in South Africa, if I can put it that way. But be that as this may, we have to respect the findings of our court. I feel very sorry, obviously, for the family, because they didn't have closure. But it's also a sign of a good, healthy judiciary. Not everybody is going to be convicted. Now and then there must be, acquittals, and that's a sign of a justice system that's working.
Karen writes in and says, such a humbling experience to hear how much he gives to his work, to all the public's benefit, which is so true, having watched you work for 20 years. What's next for Mike Barkhuizen?
Well, I'm taking a break at the moment. I can see that I'm at home now, because I see a lot of the chores that have been heaping up are being done. As you already said, it's our wedding anniversary today, so we're having a bit of a holiday and we're going out. I'm planning to write a book. In fact, my children are very adamant I must write a book about my experience. I'd like to write a book about it. And then, if God helps me, I hope to do make myself available to private detective agencies, and then I'm going to work in the civilian field for at least for another year or two.
How does it feel to leave the police service after so many years?
It's a lifestyle, It's more than just a job. Especially the old guard, if I may include myself in that part of the police. And it's difficult. There's a specific camaraderie. In fact, this morning I went to go print something at a print shop, and a guy standing behind the counter used to be a policeman at Rondebosch, and he recognized me, and we started chatting. And he said to me, he's been out of the police now for 10 years, and he still misses that camaraderie, because it's a special camaraderie and esprit de corps amongst the policemen.
Lieutenant Colonel Mike Barkhuizen, after 43 years as one of the best policemen, the best detectives in South Africa, he is finally retiring. Truly one of the best detectives this country has ever had. And now he's off to write a book. You have to write that book.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I think if I can, at this stage, also just take the opportunity. These cases weren't always solved on my own. I'd like to extend a welcome to all my colleagues who helped me investigating these cases, and especially to those members of the public who were sometimes under very dangerous circumstances, were willing to come forward with information and assist and make statements and things like that, because they also basically the heroes in some of these cases. Thank you.
Mike, thanks so much for being here.